Composure is the only advantage no one can ever take from you once you have actually built it. Not money, not status, not the last word in an argument. Composure, because it lives entirely inside you, cannot be stolen, borrowed, or negotiated away by anyone determined to unsettle you. Most people spend their whole lives trying to out-argue, out-maneuver, or outperform everyone around them, when the real advantage was never in the contest at all. It was in becoming a person no contest could actually rattle. There is a woman who moved through rooms full of people determined to underestimate her, and she never once needed to prove them wrong through argument. She simply remained unreadable, steady, and entirely in possession of herself. And that alone did more to disarm her critics than any clever rebuttal ever could have. This is not a lesson in defeating other people. It was never about them. It is a lesson in becoming so thoroughly grounded in your own composure that outsmarting you, dominating you, or provoking you simply stops being possible, not because you fought harder, but because you finally stopped handing out the one thing every manipulation actually depends on: your reaction. Understand, before we go further, what real dominance actually means, because the word has been badly misused for a long time. True dominance was never about controlling other people, extracting their compliance, or winning every exchange through cleverness or force. That version of dominance is fragile, requiring constant maintenance, constant vigilance against the next challenger, constant proof that the throne has not been quietly claimed by someone sharper. Real dominance is quieter and far more durable. It is mastery over your own impulses so complete that external pressure simply stops finding purchase, because there is nothing left in you for it to grab onto. The 5 rules that follow will not teach you to manipulate anyone. Manipulation is a tool for people who have not yet learned to stand on their own composure, who need to control external circumstances because they have not yet mastered their internal ones. What follows instead is a discipline of self-possession so complete that you will rarely need to outsmart anyone, because most attempts to outsmart you will simply pass through you without finding anywhere to land. It is worth being honest about why this reframe matters so much. A person chasing dominance over others is perpetually dependent on those others, needing someone to defeat, someone to control, and someone to prove themselves against in order to feel secure. That security is fragile by design, collapsing the moment a worthier opponent appears, or the moment the game itself changes in a way the old strategies cannot answer. A person who has instead mastered themselves needs no opponent at all. Their security was never contingent on anyone else losing in the first place, which makes it, by a wide margin, the more durable and the more genuinely powerful position to hold. The first rule is this: never reveal what actually wounds you. You expected that honesty required transparency about every vulnerability, that hiding your sensitive places was somehow deceptive, unworthy of a person committed to authenticity. There is a difference, though, between authenticity and exposure. Authenticity means you do not pretend to be someone you are not. Exposure means handing every observer a map of exactly where to aim if they ever decide to hurt you. You are allowed to be genuinely yourself while still protecting the specific tender places that a bad actor could exploit if they ever learn where to look. People who intend harm study reactions the way a locksmith studies a lock, searching for the exact pressure point that springs it open. Every time you visibly flinch at a particular comment, every time your face betrays exactly which insult landed, you have handed that person a key they did not earn and will likely use again. This is not about suppressing genuine emotion in the relationships that deserve your full honesty. It is about recognizing that not every room and not every person in it has earned access to your unguarded reactions. Consider how quickly a skilled provocateur adjusts their approach the moment they discover which comment actually lands. A single visible reaction teaches them everything they need to know for every future attempt, while a steady, unreadable response teaches them nothing at all, forcing them to abandon a strategy that simply is not working. This is not about becoming cold or distant with people who genuinely care about you. It is specifically about the rooms where you sense correctly that someone is testing rather than connecting, probing rather than relating. And in those specific rooms, your unguarded reaction is not vulnerability. It is simply information handed for free to someone who has not earned it. You expected that hiding a vulnerable reaction required an exhausting constant performance, a mask you would have to maintain at all times, regardless of the cost. In practice, this discipline requires far less effort than it initially seems, because most reactions are simply habits, not involuntary responses beyond your control. A habit, once noticed, can be interrupted, and the interruption becomes easier with repetition until the steady, unreadable response is no longer a performance at all, but simply who you have become. The second rule is this: respond slower than anyone expects you to. You expected quick, decisive reactions to prove your intelligence, your competence, and your readiness to meet any challenge the instant it appeared. Speed in most confrontations is actually a liability disguised as strength. A fast reaction is an unexamined reaction, shaped by whatever emotion arrived first rather than by careful judgment. The person who pauses, even briefly, before responding retains an advantage that the person who reacts instantly has already surrendered. The advantage of choosing their response deliberately rather than simply reacting on impulse. Think of the difference between a chess player who moves the instant it is their turn and one who studies the board fully before committing. The instant mover is not necessarily worse, but they are working with less information than they could have gathered. Trading depth for speed in a game where depth is usually what actually wins. Conversations, negotiations, and confrontations reward the same patience. The person willing to sit with a question a moment longer than expected almost always produces a wiser answer than the person who felt compelled to feel the silence immediately. This pause unsettles people who are used to provoking immediate, predictable reactions from everyone around them. When you respond a beat later than expected, calmly, on your own timeline rather than theirs, you communicate something they were not prepared for. That their provocation did not actually control you the way it was designed to. Practice this pause in small moments first, the pause before answering a pointed question, and the pause before responding to a text sent specifically to provoke a fast, emotional reply. That pause, small as it seems, is where your composure actually lives. Notice how much of modern communication is designed specifically to eliminate this pause, rewarding instant replies, instant reactions, and instant engagement before the mind has had any real chance to evaluate what is actually being asked of it. Reclaiming the pause in a culture built to eliminate it is itself a quiet act of rebellion, a refusal to let external systems dictate the pace at which you are willing to think. You are allowed to say, I will respond to that later, and mean it, even when every design choice around you is built to make that feel unacceptable. There is also a strategic clarity that only becomes available once you have built this pause into your default response. A person who reacts instantly rarely has the mental space to notice the actual dynamics of the situation they are reacting to, too consumed by the reaction itself to observe anything beyond it. A person who pauses, even briefly, retains enough presence of mind to notice what is actually happening in the room, who is watching, what is actually being asked, and what response would genuinely serve them rather than simply satisfy the urgency of the moment. The third rule is this: do not narrate your plans before they are finished. You expected that sharing your intentions openly, your goals, your strategies, and your next moves were simply honest communication, the transparent behavior of someone with nothing to hide. Often, announcing an unfinished plan does something quieter and more costly than dishonesty ever could. It invites outside opinion, outside doubt, and outside interference long before the plan has had the chance to become solid enough to withstand any of it. A seed does not benefit from being dug up repeatedly to check on its progress. Neither does an intention still in its earliest, most fragile stages. This is not secrecy for its own sake, and it is not about deceiving anyone who deserves your honesty. It is about protecting your own focus from the noise of premature commentary, the well-meaning doubt of people who mean you no harm but simply cannot resist offering an opinion on something that was never theirs to weigh in on yet. Let your results speak before your intentions do. A finished outcome is far harder to argue with than an unfinished plan, still vulnerable to everyone else's uninvited feedback. This does not mean isolating yourself entirely from trusted counsel. A small circle of people who have genuinely earned the right to hear your unfinished thinking and who have proven repeatedly that they can hold that information with care rather than doubt is invaluable during the early stages of any plan. The rule is not against seeking wise counsel. It is against broadcasting unfinished intentions indiscriminately to an audience that has not earned the trust required to receive them responsibly. Consider how often an early idea, still fragile and unformed, dies not because it was a bad idea, but because it was shared too soon with someone who responded with well-meaning skepticism at exactly the wrong moment before the idea had accumulated enough of your own conviction to survive outside doubt. Protect the early stage. Let a plan mature in private long enough to withstand scrutiny before you ever invite scrutiny into the room. This is simply timing, not deception, and the difference between the two is a discernment worth developing carefully. There's also a quieter danger in narrating your plans too early, the danger of performing the plan instead of executing it. Announcing an intention publicly can produce a small hit of satisfaction, the feeling of having already accomplished something, simply from the social recognition of having declared it. That premature satisfaction can quietly sap the motivation actually required to finish the work, because part of the reward has already been collected in advance. Withholding the announcement until the work is done keeps the full motivation intact, reserved entirely for the completion rather than spent early on the declaration. The fourth rule is this: stay calm precisely when everyone around you expects chaos. You expected that matching someone's intensity, meeting their volume with your own, proved that you would not be pushed around. In practice, escalation rarely produces the outcome you were hoping for. It simply hands control of the interaction to whoever is most comfortable with chaos, and that is rarely the person trying to protect their own peace. Calm, held steadily in the middle of someone else's storm, is not weakness. It is the single hardest thing to manipulate, because manipulation depends on predictable emotional reactions, and a calm person has removed the exact lever the manipulation was counting on. There is a reason people who study conflict closely often describe the calmest person in the room as the one who ultimately holds the most power, regardless of who technically has more authority, more resources, or a louder voice. Chaos wants a dance partner. It cannot escalate on its own, and the moment you decline to match its rhythm, it either burns itself out quickly or reveals itself, quite plainly, to any onlooker as excessive and unwarranted. Your calm does not just protect you in that moment. It often exposes the disproportion of the other person's reaction far more clearly than any argument you could have made in response to it. This calm is not about suppressing your feelings until they explode later in private. It is about developing enough internal steadiness that a provocation no longer automatically translates into a visible reaction. You can feel the sting of an insult fully and still choose deliberately not to hand the person who delivered it the satisfaction of watching it land. This is not dishonesty. It is simply the recognition that your reactions are yours to allocate, and not every provocateur has earned the right to witness where theirs actually struck. Notice how much of chaos, when examined honestly, depends entirely on an audience willing to escalate alongside it. A person shouting into a room that refuses to shout back is left eventually with nowhere further to take the intensity, no fuel to keep the fire climbing. Your calm in this sense is not passive. It is an active refusal to supply the exact resource the chaos was counting on to sustain itself. And without that resource, most provocations exhaust themselves far faster than anyone watching would have expected. There is a particular skill in distinguishing between situations that genuinely require a firm, immediate response and situations that simply want you to perform distress for an audience invested in watching you lose your composure. The first category deserves your full attention and, when necessary, decisive action. The second category deserves nothing but your continued calm, offered not as a favor to the provocateur, but as a gift to your own nervous system, which was never actually obligated to participate in a performance it did not agree to join. The fifth rule is this: release the need to have the last word. You expected that walking away from an argument without delivering a final, decisive rebuttal meant conceding, admitting defeat, and allowing the other person's version of events to stand unchallenged. Often, the opposite is true. The person who needs the last word is revealing exactly how much the interaction still controls them, still requires their validation, and still demands their final say before they can finally let it go. The person who can walk away mid-argument, unbothered, without needing to win the exchange, has already demonstrated something the last word never could, that their peace does not depend on anyone else's agreement. This is perhaps the hardest rule to practice because everything in you will insist that leaving something unaddressed means leaving it lost. Rarely is that true. Most arguments that feel urgent in the moment are forgotten by everyone else within days, regardless of who technically had the final word. What is not forgotten by you or by anyone watching is whether you could walk away from a provocation with your composure fully intact, needing nothing further from a room that was never going to give you anything worth staying for. Consider how much of the impulse toward the last word is really about needing external confirmation that you were right, that your version of events is the one that will be remembered, and that you have successfully defended a version of yourself under attack. This need for confirmation is understandable and also examined honestly, a quiet form of dependency on the very audience you are trying to outsmart. A person who has genuinely stopped needing that confirmation experiences the urge to argue further and simply lets it pass, the same way you might notice an itch and decide deliberately not to scratch it. There is real freedom on the other side of this practice, the freedom of an unfinished argument no longer costing you a single additional minute of your peace once you have chosen to walk away from it. Most people carry unresolved exchanges for days, replaying what they should have said, rehearsing the rebuttal they never delivered. The person who has released the need for the last word carries none of that weight, having decided once and permanently that the argument's outcome was never actually worth the price of their continued attention. These 5 rules are not tools for controlling other people. They were never actually about other people at all. They are tools for building a self so steady, so quietly, in possession of its own reactions, that outsmarting or dominating that self simply stops being a viable strategy for anyone who tries. This is the only dominance worth pursuing, dominance over your own impulses, your own need for validation, and your own instinct to react before you have decided whether reacting even serves you. None of these rules require you to become suspicious of everyone around you or to treat every interaction as a potential contest to be won. Most of the people in your life have earned your full openness, your unguarded reactions, your genuine, unfiltered self. These rules exist specifically for the smaller category of interactions where composure genuinely matters, the negotiations, the confrontations with people who do not have your best interests in mind, and the moments where someone is actively testing whether you can be provoked into surrendering your own peace. Reserve this discipline for those moments. Extend your full warmth freely everywhere else. Practice one rule at a time if all 5 feel like too much at once. Choose the one that currently costs you the most, the one where your reactions still feel most automatic, most beyond your own control, and begin there. Composure, like any discipline, compounds with repetition, each small success making the next attempt slightly easier, until the steadiness you once had to consciously build becomes simply who you already are, requiring no further effort to maintain at all. Carry these rules with you the next time someone studies you for a weakness to exploit, the next time your instinct rushes toward a fast, unexamined reaction, and the next time silence feels like losing when it was actually the strongest move available. Composure, practiced consistently, becomes the one advantage that never requires anyone else's cooperation to remain fully, permanently yours.